الحمد لله وكفى وسلام على عباده الذين اصطفى أما بعد فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم هل أتاك حديث موسى سبحان ربك رب العزة أما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد وبارك وسلم اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد وبارك وسلم اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد وبارك وسلم. So yesterday we reached up to the ayat number 15, which is the ayat recited at the beginning today, which is Hal Ataka Hadithu Musa. So here basically Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is mentioning, did the story of Musa alayhi salam reach you? Yani this is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala addressing the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam. Yani the reason why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying this is because He wants to draw our interest and attention to this story about Musa alayhi salam. Now, you may be aware that Musa alayhi salam is mentioned in many different parts of the Quran. And every time Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions Musa alayhi salam, it's really to show a part of his story and to give us a lesson. So you'll see that Musa alayhi salam's story is kind of mentioned in various parts of the Quran. And his life generally was quite ajib, very interesting. Even from the start, from his birth, miraculous beginning of his life, what happened, and even throughout his life. So inshallah ta'ala, what we'll do in this session is we're going to cover a little bit about the story of Musa alayhi salam, and just to give you a bit of a background and overview about that, inshallah ta'ala. So the story of Musa alayhi salam kind of sets the scene as to what the environment was like. So you had basically Egypt, and you had the leader of Egypt who was known as the Pharaoh or Fir'aun. And Fir'aun was basically known to be a tyrant ruler and a very oppressive king, and he would do a lot of zulm, oppression on his people. And particularly, he would target the Bani Israel. So who are the Bani Israel? The Bani Israel are the children of Ya'qub alayhi salam, yani Yusuf alayhi salam and his brothers. And then obviously their offspring as well come under that banner. So they were referred to as the Bani Israel. Bani basically means children, and Israel refers to Ya'qub alayhi salam because this was one of his names. Now, you may be familiar with the Surah Yusuf, and if you've come across that surah and you've read it, you'll understand that Yusuf alayhi salam went to Egypt when he was a young boy, because he was left in a well, and then some travelers picked him up, found him and sold him as a slave in Egypt. Eventually, Yusuf alayhi salam actually becomes the minister in Egypt, and then he basically moves his family over to Egypt from where they were previously. So now you've got two types of people that live in Egypt. You have the local Egyptians, the original Egyptians that were there, and then you have the immigrants, the Muhajirun of Egypt. For a long time then, the rule of Egypt was with the immigrants, yani as the descendants of Yusuf alayhi salam and his family, etc. And then at one point down the generations, the rule went to the locals, yani an Egyptian person. And this is when the oppression begins to start against the immigrants, yani the Bani Israel. And they were basically made to be like slaves, and they were treated like slaves. So one of the rulers was this particular Fir'aun character, and during his rule, one of his ministers comes and tells him some shocking news. He tells him that, I fear that someone from the Bani Israel is going to finish your kingdom. Now obviously this was shocking news, and the king obviously feared for his seat, and he wanted to basically find out how he can try and avert the situation. Now, one thing you have to remember is, at that time in Egypt, magic was a big deal, sihr. So a lot of people were into this thing called sorcery and magic. People were entertained by it, people were amazed by it. And this minister was also happened to be a fortune teller type person. So now Fir'aun is very concerned because he doesn't want to lose his kingdom, and he thought of a strategy to try and overcome this situation. So what they concluded was that we can't actually kill all of the Bani Israel, because who are we going to have as servants to serve us and work for us? So they came to this suggestion that 1 year we'll kill a boy, and the next year we'll let whatever boys are born live, and then we'll rotate it like this. And that way, basically, we'll have some population to work with and serve us, and then the other ones we will basically kill. Now, obviously, this was a stupid sort of conclusion, because, the child that was going to be destined to take over his kingdom could be born from that group of children that were left to live, rather than the ones that were killed. But this was what they decided, and this is what they actually did, unfortunately. Now, Musa alayhi salam at that time was born in the year that the boys were meant to be killed. Now, just as a side point, look at the lesson that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is giving here. That they can plan whatever they want to plan, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the best of planners. And so if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wills a person to live, then no one can change that. And if Allah ta'ala wants to destroy somebody, then no one can change that either. That is going to come to pass. In fact, in a hadith, Prophet ﷺ mentioned that if all the men and jinn get together and they want to harm you, if Allah ta'ala does not want that, then no one can harm you. And similarly, if all the men and jinn were to get together to benefit you, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala didn't decree that, then they cannot benefit you. So it's very, very simple. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the ultimate planner, and whatever He decrees is what happens. So now they plan to kill every baby boy that's born. Alhamdulillah. So the baby Musa is born, and the guards get wind of the fact that a child has been born in a locality, so they actually come search the houses to try and find who this baby is, and then unfortunately try and kill the baby. Allah Ta'ala then put a thought in the heart of the mother of Musa alayhi salam. Now, this is a very interesting phenomenon as well. Sometimes certain people who are close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, yani the awliya Allah, people who have that deep connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they get this experience. It's called ilham in Arabic, or in English we would call it an inspiration. Yani Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala puts a thought in the heart of that person. And in this case, this is what happened with the mother of Musa alayhi salam. So she had this really strong urge and feeling in her heart, which was from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that told her that she should basically take a box, put baby Musa in that box, and then put that box in the river. So in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions that He inspired her heart. So this was the actual wording used in the Quran. So put the baby in the box essentially, and then throw the box in the river, and then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said to her that I will bring him back to you. So here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is comforting the mother of Musa that yes, do this thing. I know it's very difficult, but once you do it, I will basically make sure that Musa alayhi salam comes back to you. So she had this strong yaqeen about this thing, and she actually went ahead and did exactly that. And she put her trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, put Musa alayhi salam, the baby, in the box, and threw the box in the river. So then it mentions in the story that Musa alayhi salam had an older sister. So her mother asked the sister to go and follow the box and see where the baby ends up. So now this his sister is following the box and trying to see where it goes, and basically make sure she can find out where it ends up. In the meantime, the guards turn up, and they couldn't find any baby, obviously, because now the baby is gone. So they left. So from that perspective, they were relieved. Now, here's where it gets very interesting. Fir'aun had a wife called Asiya, and she was quite beloved to Fir'aun. It just so happens that one of the miracles that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put on Musa alayhi salam was that whenever somebody would look at him, they would have this deep love for him, because he was such a beautiful baby. So this was something that Allah ta'ala kind of put on the face of Musa alayhi salam. Now Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in His planning, basically made the box with the baby in it arrive at the riverbank near the palace of the Fir'aun. At that time, it just so happened that Fir'aun and his wife Asiya were taking a walk. Now they see this box, and she asks for one of the guards to go and bring the box out of the river so she can see what's in it. When she opens it, she sees the baby Musa and instantly she falls in love with the baby. And one thing to bear in mind here is that she didn't actually have any children of her own, and obviously without having a child, she was actually very, keen to have a child. Now Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given her, a baby. And Fir'aun basically loved her very much. Now, even though this was the year that the baby was supposed to be killed, Fir'aun didn't want to disappoint his wife. So when she asks him about keeping the child, he kind of agrees, and they keep the baby. Now, just to reiterate the promise that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned to the mother of Musa, that he will bring the baby back to her. So now the next stage of the story happens. So now the sisters followed the baby, and she sees that it's gone to Fir'aun. And so now Fir'aun and his wife take the baby back to the palace, and the baby at some point gets hungry and starts crying. And in those days, the culture was that they would call wet nurses who would basically come and wean the baby and feed the baby. Now, every sort of wetness that is given to the baby doesn't really get accepted by the baby. Yani Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions in the Quran that He made the milk of every other woman haram on Musa alayhi salam. So every woman that came, he couldn't basically be weaned by her. And now it's getting to a situation where, they're all worried for the baby's survival because he's not taking milk from anybody. So now here the sister comes in, and she mentions to Fir'aun that I know of a woman who had a baby last year, and she can feed him. And this is not a lie. So this was referring to Harun alayhi salam, who is the brother of Musa alayhi salam. And that was the year that the baby was not decreed to be killed. So she was quite comfortable in telling them that the baby was born that year. So now she mentions that this baby is already being breastfed by this lady, so she can easily take on Musa alayhi salam as well and feed him as well. So now the real mother of Musa alayhi salam comes, and Musa alayhi salam starts feeding. So now everybody's happy. Fir'aun is happy, and his wife is happy that, okay, alhamdulillah, we found somebody who's going to be able to feed our child. So they ask the mother of Musa alayhi salam to stay in the palace and feed him, and stay there and look after him, etc. But the mother of Musa alayhi salam's trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was such that she refused to stay in the palace, and she said, I'm going to go and stay in my own house. So now look what happens, subhanallah. Fir'aun agrees and says, take the baby, that's fine, and we'll even give you a salary for your work that you're going to do, yani, for feeding him and looking after him. So now not only does she get the baby back, she also gets a salary, some money, and she's able to feed her own baby through that process. So now Musa alayhi salam comes back, and now he's secure and safe living with his mother, and he's now actually secure and safe from the army of Fir'aun as well, because now he's now considered the adopted son of the Pharaoh. Now he starts to get older, and he starts to reach a stage where he's actually eating solid foods, etc. And now he actually goes back into the palace. And he's actually raised up in the palace, and he grows up to be a very strong man. Now, Musa alayhi salam kind of remembers his roots, and he has actually a very soft spot for the Bani Israel, because he is from amongst them, and he's not a local Egyptian. Now, here's a situation where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala begins to test him. So now he is out in the locality, and he sees two people fighting in front of him. One is from Bani Israel, and the other is a local Egyptian. Musa alayhi salam sympathizes with the Bani Israel, and he tries to basically intervene in this fight and break the fight up, and tries to push away the Egyptian. So while all this scuffle was happening, in self-defense, he kind of punches this Egyptian person, and he has such strength that he actually kills the man accidentally. Wow, what a punch, subhanAllah. He was able to basically kill him just through his own strength. So the next day, he sees two people fighting again, and this time he thinks perhaps nobody knows that I was involved in the previous fight, so he tries to go and intervene again. And this time the Egyptian person that was in that fight says to him, are you going to do the same thing again? And now he gets worried that, okay, this guy recognizes me, and perhaps basically there's going to be consequences if people find out that I was involved in that fight yesterday and that I'd killed somebody. Now, the reason why this was the case was that there was a law in the land at that time that if somebody kills a person by accident, then the punishment is that they will actually get the death penalty. So he now thinks that, okay, it's better for me to leave this place and go somewhere else. Now, even though we could argue that it was actually accidental that he'd killed this other person, but the fact is that the law was very strict, so it wouldn't matter if it was accidental or not, he would potentially have been given the death penalty. So now he decides to leave Egypt and he goes to a place called Madian. Now, this incident is also mentioned in some detail, so I'll try and elaborate a little bit, inshallah ta'ala, just to get the background in front of you guys. So now Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at times sends prophets to various different places. Now, in our time when Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam came, he came to Makkah Mukarramah, but he was basically for all of the peoples at the time. He was there for everybody. He wasn't specific to a person or a place or a tribe or anything like that. But in previous times, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sometimes sent Anbiya alayhi salam, he could have sent them to a certain tribe or a certain area. And sometimes you could have 2 or 3 prophets living in a different area, but in the same time. And this is one of those situations. So when Musa alayhi salam leaves Egypt, he goes to a place called Madian. Now in Madian, there was actually a prophet of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, whose name was Shu'aib alayhi salam. Now Shu'aib alayhi salam had 2 daughters, and he himself was quite old at this time. Now Musa alayhi salam arrives in Madian, and the first thing he does is he goes to a place where there's water, and probably to quench his thirst, etc. And he sees that there's a group of men at the watering place, and then he also notices that there are 2 girls waiting to the side, and they're not coming forward. Now, the Quran mentions things very, very concisely. And remember that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala only mentions those things that He wants to mention. The things that He wants us to know about, to think about, and to be aware of. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions in detail that these were 2 girls that were there and the behavior of those girls. They were shy and they were sitting well away from the group of men that were also at the well. So Allah Ta'ala is kind of indicating to us that these are the attributes and the behaviors of noble women. This is showing us their modesty. And Musa alayhi salam notices that they're waiting, and then he asks them if he can help. So now, what do they say? The first thing they do is they kind of set the scene so he understands their situation. So they say to him that our father is actually very old, and this is why we have had to come ourselves rather than our father. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions this in the Quran so that women can learn to speak to men, etc. And they were making sure that this man knows we are not here for fun and we're not just hanging around inappropriately, but because it's our father's age, etc., and he's not able to come, we're having to come ourselves and collect water. So Musa alayhi salam helps them. He goes, fetches the water, and then he says to them that he will take it back to their house for them. Now, this is also very interesting. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives the details of how Musa alayhi salam brings the water back. He says to the women that I will walk in front of you and you guys walk behind me. And this is because he doesn't want his eyes to fall on these women at any point. So this is just his own nature of modesty. So he walks ahead and then they walk behind, and then they kind of tell him and navigate to him left, right, etc., and tell him how to get to their house. There, basically, he arrives at the house, and then he actually meets Shu'aib alayhi salam. And Musa alayhi salam tells him his whole story, what happened in Egypt and how he left and how he's now arrived in Madian. And he's asking now as well that if there's any work that he can do, then let him know, and he will try and help out and do some work, etc. So then he basically leaves after dropping the water off, and then the girls basically tell their father about Musa alayhi salam and how he behaved and how he was helpful, etc. So much so that Shu'aib alayhi salam actually goes out and calls him back, and then he gives him a proposition. He says to him, marry one of my daughters and stay here for some time, for some years, and then you can go and do whatever you want after that point. So this is going to help me because I'm old, and it will help you because you want to stay away from Egypt, so this will be a good solution for you as well. So Musa alayhi salam accepts this proposal and actually marries one of the daughters of Shu'aib alayhi salam. Now, remember at this point here, up until this point, Musa alayhi salam is not actually a prophet. Yani he's not received nubuwwat at this point. Yeah, and Shu'aib alayhi salam is known as a prophet. So Musa alayhi salam at this point isn't a prophet, but Shu'aib alayhi salam is a prophet. So at this time, the other interesting fact is that they actually believed in one God, and there wasn't any form of idol worship going on, etc. And the people, however, one thing that was of concern in that area was that the people were scared of Fir'aun. And they knew that this guy was an oppressor, so they were quite fearful of him. And all the laws that he had passed in that area were basically all the laws of Fir'aun. But from a dini perspective, from a religious aspect, they were still following the religion of Yusuf alayhi salam. So now Musa alayhi salam lives in Madian for a period of about 10 years before he decides that he wants to go back home. So now he basically leaves Madian and starts making his way to Egypt with his wife. Now at this point, very interestingly, she's actually expecting a baby at this point when they're on their way back or started their journey back to Egypt. Now at this point, he's trying to find some sort of directions to get back, and he's looking for people or a caravan that can actually try and direct him. And on the way back, it's mentioned in the narrations that it was very cold, and obviously because he's traveling with his wife, she needs to take rest every so often because of her condition. So now he goes searching to see if he can find somebody to help him or guide him. He notices a light on top of a mountain. Now this then second, or the further elaboration of this is now mentioned in more detail in the Quran in the following verses. So just to kind of wrap up here, so basically they reached this valley called Tua, and in the valley there's a mountain called Sina or Sinai. So inshallah ta'ala, we're going to continue from tomorrow, inshallah, from this point in verse 16, where we'll go into the whole qissa of how Musa alayhi salam converses with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept our gathering here, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us tawfiq to maximize our time in this blessed month of Ramadan, requesting everyone for du'as as well. And inshallah ta'ala we'll speak tomorrow. وآخر الدعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين.